The ship had been built to haul ice from the rings of a gas giant that no longer had a name anyone bothered to remember. Its hull was scarred by micrometeoroids and patched with alloys that had been obsolete before the first crew member aboard had been born. It was not a warship, not a courier, not a symbol of anything except persistence. It moved because people had decided that it must, and because 1,000 small systems continued to function long after their designers had stopped being paid to care. That was how most human things survived, by becoming necessary in ways that were boring and therefore unassailable. The ship moved through interstellar dark, with its engines throttled down to a patient burn, carrying a cargo of processed water and a crew who knew each other's breathing patterns well enough to sleep through them. On the forward deck, where the artificial gravity always lagged by a fraction of a second behind the rest of the ship, a woman named Mara Quince braced her boots against the deck plates and watched a cluster of lights on a screen that had been replaced 3 times but still flickered when it thought no one was paying attention. The lights represented objects that were not there a week ago, at least not in any catalogue worth trusting. They were arranged in a loose arc, drifting in formation that suggested intention without discipline. Mara scratched at the scar along her jaw and let out a breath through her nose, the kind of breath that said this was going to complicate her day. She did not call for alarms. The ship had alarms, and they worked, but alarms were for things that could be solved by shouting and rushing. This was a thing that required a slower response. She toggled a private channel and spoke in a voice that had learned to be calm in vacuum suits and noisy bars alike. Contact cluster at 3 million clicks, bearing 92/4. No transponder I recognize. Wake the others, but do it gently. The ship answered with a soft chime, a compromise between urgency and courtesy. Doors opened and closed along the spine, and the crew emerged like thoughts coming together, each bringing their own assumptions and habits. Joran Pike arrived first, hair still flattened on one side, eyes already focused. He took in the display and frowned in a way that suggested he was doing math that involved risk. Behind him came Sina Holt, whose hands never quite stopped moving even when she was still, fingers tapping at invisible keys. Last was old Tomas, who was not old by any calendar, but had been called that long enough that no one remembered his given name. He carried a mug that smelled like bitter herbs and stared at the lights as if they might apologize. "They look small," Sina said, tilting her head. "Too small for capital ships. Too coordinated for debris," Joran replied. "Too quiet for traders." Mara nodded. "Exactly. We are going to adjust course by 2 degrees and see if they mirror. No sudden thrust changes, no broadcasts yet." The ship obeyed, engines shifting with a whisper more felt than heard. The lights on the screen hesitated, then adjusted, maintaining their arc. Old Tomas grunted. "That answers that." Mara felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the one that came when the universe reminded her that it did not care about schedules or contracts. "Bring up passive analysis. I want mass estimates and thermal signatures." As data flowed in, the picture became stranger. The objects were indeed small, smaller than most crew shuttles, but dense. Their thermal profiles suggested efficient power systems, nothing wasteful, nothing flamboyant. They were not hiding so much as they were indifferent to being seen. That indifference was, in its own way, more unsettling than aggression. "Unknowns are matching course and velocity," Sina said. "No emissions beyond baseline, no obvious weapons, but that does not mean anything." Mara leaned back and crossed her arms. She thought of the cargo holds full of ice that would be melted down into breathable air and drinking water on a dozen stations. She thought of the crew's pay already spent in their heads. She thought of how many stories started like this and how few of them ended the way the storytellers claimed. "All right," she said. "We broadcast a simple greeting, standard trade band, no embellishments." The transmission went out, a packet of information that included language keys, intent markers, and a polite declaration of presence. It was a thing humanity had refined over centuries, stripped of poetry and threat alike. The universe could ignore it or answer, but at least it could not claim surprise. The reply came faster than Mara expected. It was not in any band she recognized, but the ship systems adapted, parsing structure where they could. The message was short, almost brusque. It acknowledged receipt. It requested that the human vessel halt and prepare for inspection. It did not include threats. It did not include greetings. Sina blinked. They did not even ask what we are carrying. They assume, Joran said, or they do not care. Old Tomas took a sip from his mug. Inspection by whom? Mara considered. She felt the weight of decision settle on her shoulders, familiar and unwelcome. We ask, she said, and we do not halt yet. The second exchange was longer. The unknowns identified themselves with a term that translated poorly, something like custodians of transit integrity. They claimed authority over this region of space, citing agreements and precedents that did not appear in any human database. They insisted on compliance. Mara smiled without humor. They have invented a job. Joran snorted, or inherited one. Sina's fingers danced. Their syntax suggests collective decision-making, but not a hive, more like a committee that never adjourns. Mara leaned forward. We are not armed for a fight, and even if we were, this is not the place. We are also not required to recognize authority that cannot be demonstrated. We will slow but not stop. We will invite them to match speed and continue dialogue. The ship complied, engines easing. The lights on the screen drew closer, resolving into shapes that were not quite symmetrical. They reminded Mara of insects, not in appearance so much as in the way they occupied space, efficient and unapologetic. One detached from the group and moved ahead, positioning itself where a collision course would be possible if anyone made a mistake. The next message carried an edge. It stated that non-compliance would result in enforcement action. It specified no details. Mara exhaled slowly. They are bluffing or they are bored. Either way, we stay calm. What happened next did not fit either category. Space between the lead object and the human ship rippled, not with light but with something like pressure, a distortion that made Mara's eyes ache. Instruments screamed briefly and then recalibrated, displaying numbers that should not coexist. Gravity shifted, subtle but unmistakable, tugging the ship sideways with a hand that was gentle only because it did not need to be anything else. Artificial mass manipulation, Sina breathed. Localized, they are grabbing us without touching. The ship groaned, structure protesting in a language of stress and strain. Old Tomas set his mug down carefully, as if acknowledging that this had become serious enough to warrant respect. Joran's hands tightened on the rail. Mara did not raise her voice. Countermeasures? Sina shook her head. We can dump mass, but they can compensate. We can burn harder, but that risks hull damage. They are not trying to tear us apart. They are guiding. The distortion increased, nudging the ship onto a new vector. Mara felt a flare of anger, sharp and clean. They are not asking. No, Joran said. They are teaching. The ship was drawn toward a region of space that had been empty on every chart Mara had ever trusted. As they approached, that emptiness resolved into something vast and wrong, a structure that bent light around it, making absence into architecture. It was not a station or a ship or a planet. It was an accumulation of intent, a place where trajectories converged because someone had decided they should. Mara stared. That is not natural. Old Tomas chuckled, a sound like gravel rolling downhill. Neither are we. The human ship was guided into a pocket of relative calm where the distortions eased and the engines could maintain station without fighting. The cluster of small craft arranged themselves around it, no longer an arc but a sphere. A channel opened, direct and unfiltered. The voice that came through was not a voice at all, but a composite, layers of tone and cadence that overlapped without merging. It spoke in careful phrases, translated with precision that suggested long practice. It identified itself as a representative of a polity that spanned several stellar systems, whose purpose was to manage transit, prevent conflict, and maintain what it called the long balance. It stated that humanity's expansion had reached a threshold of concern. Mara listened without interruption. When the voice paused, she replied, "You have my attention, you do not have my consent. Explain your concern." The composite voice described humanity as anomalous. It cited population growth, technological diffusion, and a tendency to persist in environments deemed marginal. It spoke of statistical models and historical parallels. It concluded that unrestricted human movement posed a destabilizing influence. Sina muttered, "They ran the numbers and did not like the answer." Mara raised a hand, silencing her. "You are suggesting limits," Mara said, "on our movement." "Yes," the voice replied, "on your proliferation, on your interference. This is not a threat. This is a corrective measure." Mara felt the crew watching her, felt the weight of every human ship that had ever been stopped by someone who believed they knew better. "You are standing in front of a cargo hauler," she said. "We carry water. We supply stations that keep millions alive. If you intend to correct us, you will need to be more specific." The voice hesitated just enough to be noticeable. "Individual instances may be granted exemptions." "By whom?" Joran asked softly. "By us," the voice replied. Old Tomas laughed outright. "That is always how it starts." Mara leaned closer to the console. "You have built something impressive here. You have gravity like a leash and numbers like a net. You also have a misunderstanding. Humanity does not move because it is permitted. It moves because it must. You can slow a ship. You can divert a course. You cannot manage a species the way you manage traffic." The response was immediate and colder. It cited enforcement capabilities. It referenced prior successes with other civilizations. It implied consequences. Mara nodded, as if acknowledging a point in a debate. "Then you have experience. Tell me, how did those civilizations respond in the long term?" There was a pause, longer this time. Data scrolled across Sina's screen, fragments of historical records shared reluctantly. Patterns emerged. Compliance, stagnation, decline. The voice framed these as acceptable outcomes, preferable to chaos. Mara felt something settle in her chest, not fear but resolve. "We will not comply," she said. "We will not recognize your authority. We will continue on our route. You may stop us, but understand this. Every human you inconvenience becomes a story. Every ship you divert becomes a lesson." "We are very good at learning." The distortions around the ship intensified, a show of force that rattled teeth and made the hull sing. The small craft shifted, positions tightening. The voice spoke again, and now there was something like irritation woven through it. "You are a single vessel. Your defiance is symbolic." Mara smiled, and this time there was warmth in it. "So is yours." She cut the channel and turned to her crew. "Emergency protocols, dump auxiliary mass. Sina, prep the core for a short spike. Joran, I want damage control teams ready. Tomas, pray or curse or do whatever you do best." Old Tomas raised his mug in salute. "I do not pray," he said. "I remember." The ship shuddered as mass was ejected, containers vented into space in a glittering cloud. Engines flared, pushed beyond comfortable limits. The distortions fought back, gravity tightening like a fist. Systems overloaded, alarms finally earning their keep. Mara felt herself pressed into her harness, bones aching. "Core spike ready," Sina shouted over the din. "It will fry half our sensors." "Do it," Mara said. "We only need one direction." The spike hit, a pulse of energy that twisted local physics into a snarl. The gravity leash faltered, not breaking but loosening enough. The ship surged, slipping through the gap with the desperation of a thing that refused to be held. The small craft scattered, formation disrupted. For a heartbeat, Mara thought they might make it. Then the structure ahead pulsed, space folding in on itself. A barrier rose, invisible and absolute. "Brace," Joran yelled. Impact did not come. Instead, the ship was enveloped in a field that dampened motion, smothered energy. The engines cut out, not by command but by futility. The human vessel hung, trapped, every system screaming in protest. The voice returned, no longer composite but singular, as if the many had decided to speak as one. "Your resistance has been noted. You will be escorted to a holding facility. Further non-compliance will result in neutralization. Mara closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, her gaze was steady. "You have made a mistake," she said, "not in stopping us, in showing us how." She cut the channel again and slumped back, heart pounding. Around her, the crew took stock, hands shaking, laughter bubbling up in the aftermath of adrenaline. They were alive. The ship was mostly intact. They were captured but not broken. Sina wiped sweat from her brow. "What now?" Mara looked at the structure, at the small craft reforming their sphere. She thought of every human settlement built on the edge of someone else's map. She thought of children born in tin cans and taught to walk in rotating corridors. She thought of hands, small and stubborn, pushing against limits until they gave. "Now," she said, "we learn everything we can, and we make sure this story travels faster than we do." The ship was towed toward the vast construct, swallowed by its impossible geometry. Inside, gravity stabilized, lights dimmed, and systems settled into a resentful quiet. The crew gathered, bruised but unbowed, already arguing about how to jury-rig sensors and hide messages in noise. Mara allowed herself a moment of exhaustion, then straightened. The universe had drawn a line and dared humanity to notice. Humanity had noticed. And somewhere, in places far from this carefully managed balance, other ships moved through dark, carrying water and people and stories, unaware that someone had decided they were a problem. They would learn. And when they did, they would come, not in neat formations or with polite requests, but in the messy, relentless way that had carried them this far. The custodians of transit integrity had counted ships and models and probabilities. They had not counted the way humans shared anger and hope like contraband, passing it hand to hand until it multiplied. They had not counted the gravity of small hands pushing back. The holding facility did not look like a prison, which Mara decided was the first lie it told. There were no bars, no obvious weapons, no harsh lighting meant to intimidate. Instead, there was space, generous and clean, shaped into corridors that curved just enough to make perspective unreliable. Gravity was uniform, tuned carefully to human norms, as if to say that someone had done their homework. The walls were a neutral mat that refused to reflect faces clearly, and the air smelled faintly of nothing at all. It was a place designed to be reasonable, and that worried Mara more than chains ever could. The ship was guided into a cradle that felt grown rather than built, a nest of fields that supported its mass without touching the hull. As systems were dampened further, not shut down but coaxed into a docile state, Mara felt the ship's irritation like a living thing. She laid a hand on the nearest bulkhead out of habit, a small, grounding gesture. "Easy," she murmured. "We are still here." The crew gathered in the common area, the space suddenly feeling too small now that movement was constrained by circumstance rather than choice. Joran ran diagnostics that told him nothing useful except that everything important was being politely prevented from doing its job. Sina paced, fingers twitching, eyes tracking patterns only she could see. Old Tomas sat cross-legged on the deck, eyes closed, breathing slow, as if he had decided to make this someone else's problem for a few minutes. "They are good," Sina said finally, "not flashy. Not cruel, just thorough." "That is worse," Joran replied. "Flashy people want attention, cruel people want satisfaction, thorough people want outcomes." Mara nodded. "Which means they will talk to us. They already started. They believe this can be managed." As if summoned by her words, the air in front of them shimmered. A shape resolved, not a hologram but something more substantial, a projection with mass just shy of presence. It was vaguely humanoid, not in anatomy but in posture, an upright configuration that suggested communication rather than threat. Its surface shifted subtly, textures flowing like thought made visible. "I am designated as an interface," it said, voice smooth and singular. "My purpose is to facilitate understanding." Mara crossed her arms. "Understanding usually goes both ways." "Yes," the interface replied. "That is the intention." Sina tilted her head. "You chose a form we would recognize." "Correct. Familiarity reduces stress." Old Tomas opened one eye. So does honesty. The interface paused, surface rippling. Honesty is a variable concept. I will provide accuracy. Mara stepped forward. Then be accurate with us. Where are we? You are within a Nexus facility, the interface said. It exists outside conventional spatial metrics. Its function is to regulate transit and adjudicate anomalies. And we are an anomaly, Joran said. Yes, the interface agreed without hesitation. Human expansion patterns diverge significantly from established norms. Mara smiled thinly. Norms established by whom? By cumulative precedent, the interface replied. By civilizations that achieved equilibrium. Sina snorted. Equilibrium sounds like a polite word for stagnation. The interface did not react to the tone, only the content. Equilibrium minimizes conflict. Conflict is not always bad, Mara said. Sometimes it is the engine of change. The interface's surface shimmered, as if processing. Change introduces instability. Life introduces instability, old Tomas said, eyes still closed. If you want stillness, you should have stuck with rocks. Mara shot him a look that was half warning, half appreciation. Let us be clear, she said. You stopped us because you believe humanity will upset your balance. You intend to limit our movement. How? The interface raised what might have been an arm, gesturing. Through permits, quotas, designated corridors. Human vessels would be required to register intent and destination. Colonization efforts would be reviewed. Population transfers would be capped. Joran's jaw tightened. You want to turn us into paperwork? Yes, the interface said. Paperwork is predictable. Sina laughed, a sharp sound. You have never seen humans deal with paperwork. The interface inclined its head. We have observed sufficient samples. Mara shook her head. No, you have observed individuals, outliers. You have not observed desperation. Desperation is a driver of conflict, the interface replied. Desperation is a driver of invention, Mara countered, of adaptation, of survival. The interface was silent for a long moment. When it spoke again, there was a faint shift in tone, something almost like curiosity. Your species frames adversity as opportunity. Yes, Mara said simply. Because we do not have the luxury of seeing it any other way. The interface's surface dimmed slightly. Your history includes significant internal conflict. Still does, Joran said. We are bad at agreeing. Yet you present a unified front, the interface noted. Mara shrugged. We argue constantly, but when someone else tells us where we can go, we tend to align. Old Tomas opened both eyes now, fixing the interface with a steady gaze. You made a classic error. You treated us like a problem to be solved instead of a force to be reckoned with. The interface absorbed this. Force can be managed. Mara's voice softened, but there was steel beneath it. You are assuming you have time. Before the interface could respond, the ship's internal lights flickered. Sina froze mid-pace. That was not them, she said. That was us. Joran's eyes widened. What do you mean us? Sina's fingers flew over a console that should not have been responsive. I hid a seed in the core spike. A dumb one. It just listens and copies. It woke up. Mara felt a surge of pride and fear. Can they detect it? They will, Sina said. Eventually, but it is already talking. The interface turned slightly, as if sensing a change in the room. You are initiating unauthorized activity. Yes, Mara said. We are. The interface's surface darkened. This will necessitate corrective action. Old Tomas stood, joints popping. Here we go. The facility reacted not with alarms but with pressure. The air grew heavier, gravity increasing by small, deliberate increments. It was a reminder, gentle and inexorable, of who controlled the environment. Mara felt her boots sink a fraction deeper into the deck. Stop, the interface said. Cease activity. Mara gritted her teeth. You are proving our point. The gravity increased again. Sina staggered, catching herself on a bulkhead. Joran swore under his breath, muscles straining. Old Tomas laughed, breathless but defiant. You think this is impressive? I grew up on a rock that tried to kill me every day. Mara met the interface's gaze. You can crush us, she said. You can confine us. You can even kill us. but the signal is already out. Somewhere a human receiver just learned that someone thinks they can fence us in. The interface hesitated. The gravity stabilized, no longer increasing. Containment of information is feasible. Not with us, Sina said, panting. We leak. The interface turned, attention shifting inward, perhaps consulting with others beyond its singular presence. Mara took the moment to look at her crew, at the strain and the stubborn set of their jaws. She felt the familiar ache of responsibility twist inside her. She had brought them here. She would get them out, or she would make damn sure their being here mattered. Minutes passed, measured in heartbeats and shallow breaths. Finally, the interface spoke. Your transmission has been partially intercepted, it said. Damage control measures are in effect. Partial is enough, Mara replied. The interface's surface lightened, returning to its earlier neutral tone. Escalation is inefficient. Alternative approaches are being considered. Mara tilted her head. Such as observation, the interface said. Engagement, controlled exposure. Joran frowned. You want to study us? Yes, the interface said. Direct interaction may yield predictive improvements. Old Tomas snorted. We are not lab animals. No, the interface agreed. You are a variable. Mara exchanged a glance with Sina. There was opportunity here, buried under layers of threat. What does this engagement look like? Mara asked. You will be granted limited autonomy within designated zones, the interface replied. You will interact with representatives. You will demonstrate behaviors. And in return, Mara said, in return, enforcement actions will be suspended pending review, the interface said. Joran exhaled slowly. You are offering us a leash with slack. Yes, the interface said. Mara considered. Refusal meant immediate escalation, likely confinement. Acceptance meant time, and time was a resource humans knew how to exploit. We accept, she said, on one condition. The interface inclined its head. State it. Our crew remains together, Mara said. No separation, no individual interrogations. The interface processed. Agreed. Sina let out a shaky laugh. Well, she said, this is new. The gravity eased, returning to something close to comfortable. The air felt lighter, though nothing had physically changed. The interface gestured, and a section of the wall flowed open, revealing a corridor beyond. You will be escorted, it said. As they moved, the facility revealed more of itself. Spaces opened and closed with organic grace, rooms forming as needed. They passed areas where other beings moved, not confined but directed, each distinct, each carrying the weight of being assessed. Mara saw tall, willowy forms with iridescent skin, compact clusters that moved as one, entities that existed as fields more than matter. All of them were here because someone had decided they needed oversight. This is your equilibrium, Mara murmured. Yes, the interface said, it is stable. For now, old Tomas replied. They were led to a habitation area tailored to human needs, complete with familiar angles and textures. It was comfortable enough to be unsettling. As the interface withdrew, promising future interaction, the crew collapsed into seats, exhaustion catching up. Sina rubbed her temples. The seed is still running, she said quietly. It is piggybacking on their internal traffic. We are mapping the place. Joran looked at her with awe. How long? As long as they let us breathe, she said. Mara closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of what lay ahead. They were a sample, a test case. Everything they did would be watched, analyzed, filed away. Humanity reduced to a data set. She opened her eyes, a slow smile spreading. Then we give them data they cannot use, she said. We argue, we cooperate, we improvise, we contradict ourselves. We show them that predicting us is harder than stopping us. Old Tomas chuckled. Ah, weaponized inconsistency. Exactly, Mara said. We are very good at that. Beyond the walls, in chambers where light bent around thought and probability was a tool, other minds considered the anomaly. They ran simulations that branched and collapsed, seeking stable outcomes. They adjusted parameters, added constraints. Again and again, the human variable refused to settle. Somewhere deep within the facility, the seed Sina had planted listened and learned, copying patterns, finding cracks. It sent whispers out into the dark, writing noise and chance. carrying a simple message wrapped in complexity. They are trying to manage us. And far away, on ships hauling water and people and dreams, on stations that spun against vacuum because stopping meant death, humans received fragments and filled in the rest with instinct. They argued, they planned, they remembered old stories about borders and those who tried to enforce them. In the Nexus facility, Mara Quince sat with her crew and plotted not an escape but a demonstration. They would show their captors something no model could account for, not strength alone, or numbers, or technology. They would show them what happened when you tried to put a ceiling on a species that had learned to live without one. Observation began the way bureaucracy always did, with forms disguised as conversations and constraints framed as courtesies. The facility did not assign guards in the human sense. Instead, environments adjusted themselves subtly to encourage compliance. Corridors curved away from restricted areas. Doors took longer to open when approached with urgency. Gravity shifted by imperceptible margins, rewarding calm movement and penalizing haste. It was elegant, Mara had to admit, the kind of control that convinced you it was your idea. They were introduced to representatives one by one, never more than a few at a time, always in spaces calibrated to reduce perceived threat. The first was a being that existed as a lattice of light, its form defined by intersecting planes that shimmered with internal motion. It communicated through pulses that the interface translated into language with almost apologetic precision. It asked about human governance structures, about decision-making, about how authority was established and challenged. Mara answered honestly and incompletely, which was the most honest way she knew how. She described councils and elections and coups, revolutions sparked by bread shortages and ideals alike. She emphasized disagreement, the constant push and pull that defined human politics. The lattice brightened and dimmed as it processed, its pulses quickening. "Your systems are inefficient," it observed. "Yes," Mara agreed, "they are. Why do you persist with them?" Mara shrugged. "Because efficiency is not our highest value." "What is?" the lattice asked. Mara did not answer immediately. She thought of children learning to walk in low gravity, of engineers arguing over coffee, of refugees packed into ships that should not fly but did anyway. "Choice," she said finally, "even when it hurts." The lattice dimmed, pulses slowing. "Choice introduces error. Error introduces learning," Mara replied. The next representative was more direct, a compact being with a dense gravitational signature that made the air feel thicker around it. It asked about human military capabilities, about escalation thresholds and retaliation doctrines. Joran took the lead there, voice steady, detailing fleets and strategies while deliberately omitting the most important element. "What prevents total war?" the being asked. Joran smiled thinly. "Fear," he said, "and familiarity." "Explain," the being demanded. "We know what war costs," Joran said. "We know because we keep doing it. We also know who we are fighting. That makes restraint possible." The being considered this. "Your history suggests restraint often fails." "Yes," Joran said, "and yet here we are." Between sessions, the crew regrouped, comparing notes, arguing about what to reveal and what to obscure. Cena's seed continued to map the facility, building a picture of layered control systems and redundancies that bordered on obsessive. The custodians, as Mara had begun to call them in her head, did not trust single points of failure. Everything was distributed, mirrored, backed up by contingencies that assumed error but not defiance. "They plan for malfunction," Cena said one cycle, sprawled on the deck with data projected above her. "They do not plan for rebellion, not really." Old Tomas snorted. "Because rebellion does not make sense to them. Because rebellion is inefficient," Mara said. "Because rebellion is emotional," Old Tomas added, "and they think they have outgrown that." The facility allowed limited interaction with other detained species, always under the guise of cultural exchange. Mara spoke with a tall, soft-spoken being whose people had once spread aggressively through a cluster of stars, only to be halted and regulated. It described a gradual narrowing of possibility, a future that became predictable to the point of numbness. We no longer starve, it said. We no longer war. We also no longer surprise ourselves. Do you regret it? Mara asked. The being paused, a long, contemplative silence. Regret is a human concept, it said finally, but I experienced something adjacent. That word stuck with Mara, adjacent, close enough to feel, not close enough to name. As days passed, the custodians adjusted their approach. They introduced scenarios, simulations where the crew was asked to respond to hypothetical crises, a resource shortage, a territorial dispute, a technological breakthrough with dangerous implications. The simulations were sophisticated, branching in response to decisions. The custodians watched closely, recording outcomes. The humans did not behave as expected. In one scenario, faced with a shortage that could be solved by strict rationing, the crew argued loudly, proposed 3 incompatible plans, implemented 2 of them simultaneously, and then scrapped both in favor of a third, inspired by a joke old Tomas made about stealing from themselves. The outcome was messy but effective. The custodians flagged it as an anomaly. In another, presented with an opportunity to gain advantage by withholding information, Mara shared it freely, trusting that transparency would build leverage later. It did, in ways the models had not predicted. They are inconsistent, one internal report noted. They are adaptive, another countered. Adaptation was the problem. The custodians' models relied on convergence, on the idea that given enough constraints, behavior would settle into predictable patterns. Humans refused to settle. They oscillated, overcorrected, learned sideways. Cena's seed found its first real crack during a routine systems update. The custodians optimized constantly, pruning redundancies they deemed unnecessary. One such redundancy was a low-level error logging channel that humans would have left alone out of superstition if nothing else. Cena slipped through it, gaining access to deeper layers. They are not malicious, she told Mara quietly. They genuinely think they are helping. I know, Mara said. That is why this is dangerous. The custodians convened a larger session, bringing multiple representatives together. The interface presided, its surface more complex now, patterns interweaving as if it carried the weight of many voices. Analysis indicates your species exhibits high variance, it said. Predictive confidence remains low. Welcome to the club, Mara replied. This is unsustainable, the interface continued. Unmanaged variance leads to systemic risk. Mara leaned forward. You keep saying unmanaged. Why do you assume management is the only alternative to chaos? Because control reduces uncertainty, the interface said. Control reduces growth, Mara shot back. You have confused stability with health. The interface's tone sharpened. Your expansion threatens existing equilibria. Yes, Mara said. Because equilibria that cannot tolerate change are brittle. The room's ambient light shifted, reflecting rising internal debate. The custodians were not a monolith. Mara could feel fault lines forming, some voices pushing for stricter enforcement, others advocating for accommodation. You propose unrestricted movement, the interface said. I propose negotiated coexistence, Mara replied. Corridors we agree on, limits we set ourselves, responsibility shared, not imposed. Trust is required, the interface said. Mara spread her hands. Trust is always required, you just prefer not to admit it. Silence fell, heavy and thoughtful. Somewhere deep in the facility, processes branched and recombined. The seed fed Cena a flood of data, glimpses of debate and dissent among the custodians. They were not used to this. Their system relied on consensus achieved through overwhelming data, not through values. Old Tomas broke the silence. Let me ask you something, he said, addressing the interface. Why did you build this place? To prevent conflict, the interface replied. Why? Old Tomas pressed. Conflict is inefficient, the interface said. Old Tomas smiled sadly. No. Conflict is painful. You built this because you are afraid of pain. The interface did not respond immediately. When it did, Its voice was quieter. Pain degrades systems. Pain teaches systems, old Tomas said. If you eliminate it entirely, you eliminate learning. The custodians recessed, withdrawing to deliberate. The humans were returned to their habitation space, the walls flowing closed with deceptive gentleness. Sina exhaled. I think we rattled them. I think we scared them, Joran said. Mara sank into a chair, exhaustion washing over her. Good, she said. Fear is something they understand. Now we need to show them courage. Outside the human space, the custodians' debates intensified. Models failed to converge. Simulations that included human variables produced widening error margins. Some argued for immediate containment, citing risk. Others pointed to historical records of civilizations that had stagnated under too much control. One voice, quieter but persistent, raised a question that had not been asked before. What if equilibrium was not the goal? The seed caught that question and wrapped it in layers of noise, sending it outward along improbable paths. It was not a warning this time, but an invitation. Out in the dark, human ships continued to move. Some carried water, some carried weapons, all carried stories. The fragments they received from the seed did not form a complete picture, but they did not need to. Humans were very good at filling gaps with purpose. In the Nexus facility, Mara stared at the ceiling, watching patterns shift. She thought of gravity wells and small hands pushing back, of systems that broke because they were too perfect. She smiled to herself. They wanted to understand humanity. They were about to learn that understanding was not a destination, but a process. And processes, once started, had a way of spreading. The custodians did not announce their decisions so much as they allowed it to manifest. The facility shifted around the human habitation space, walls thinning, corridors extending, boundaries becoming suggestions rather than rules. Gravity relaxed its subtle punishments. Doors opened more readily. It was an experiment, Mara realized, a calculated loosening meant to observe how humans behaved when given just enough rope to choose what to do with it. They are testing us again, Joran said, watching a previously sealed passage unfurl into a broad, gently curving corridor. Yes, Mara replied. But this time the test is not whether we comply, it is whether we reveal ourselves. Old Tomas stretched, bones popping like punctuation marks. Then we should be very careful to be ourselves. They moved together, as agreed, the facility accommodating their insistence on proximity with what might have been tolerance or might have been curiosity. Other beings moved through the expanded spaces now, some glancing at the humans with open interest, others with practiced indifference. Information displays bloomed and faded along the walls, offering context, history, carefully curated explanations of why the custodians existed and how much worse things had been before them. Sina skimmed the displays with a hacker's eye. This is propaganda, she said. Not lies exactly, just selective truth. Selective truth is still a lie, old Tomas muttered. The first incident happened 3 corridors out from their habitation space. A group of 3 beings, compact and heavy, were clustered around a malfunctioning environmental node. The node pulsed erratically, local gravity fluctuating in nauseating waves. Other custodial species gave the area a wide berth, waiting for an authorized correction that had not yet arrived. Mara slowed. Problem, she said. Joran nodded. And protocol says wait. Old Tomas grinned. Protocol is bored. Sina was already moving. If I can access the node, I can stabilize it. Their systems are elegant but brittle. Mara hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded. Do it. They approached without announcement. The compact beings turned, startled, their surface textures darkening in what Mara interpreted as alarm. Sina knelt by the node, fingers dancing through an interface that reconfigured itself to accommodate her presence. Unauthorized interaction detected. A distant voice intoned, not the familiar interface, but a local system response. Yes, Sina said cheerfully, I know. She bypassed a safety layer, introduced a crude but effective feedback loop, and the node's pulsing smoothed into a steady hum. Gravity stabilized. The compact beings relaxed, textures lightening, one of them emitting a low vibration that Sina's translator tagged as relief. "Thank you," it said, the words hesitant but sincere. Mara smiled. "You are welcome." The response from the facility was swift but measured. The interface appeared, its surface patterns tight and controlled. "You have violated operational boundaries," it said. "Yes," Mara replied, "and we fixed a problem." "Problems are addressed through established channels," the interface said. "Channels that were too slow," Mara countered. "People were affected." The interface paused, processing. "Your intervention reduced disruption." "Yes," Mara said. "That is what we do." The interface withdrew without further comment, leaving behind a ripple of attention. Other beings watched the humans now, curiosity edging into something like interest. Word spread quickly in a place designed to minimize surprises. Sina's seed drank it all in. She saw the data spikes, the internal flags raised and debated. The custodians logged the incident as a deviation with positive outcome, a category that did not have many entries. "Good," Sina murmured. "They hate that category." Over the next cycles, similar moments accumulated. A human helped reroute energy to a failing habitat segment. Joran mediated a dispute between two species over access, timing to a shared resource, not by imposing a solution, but by reframing the problem until both sides realized they wanted the same thing. Old Tomas told stories in common areas, not as entertainment, but as context, tales of human mistakes and recoveries that carried lessons without instructions. The custodians watched, and their models strained. "You are interfering," the interface said during a scheduled engagement. "We are participating," Mara replied. "Participation without authorization destabilizes governance," the interface insisted. "Governance that cannot tolerate participation is already unstable," Mara said. The interface did not disagree. It simply logged the exchange. The tipping point came not from the humans, but from another detained species. A being whose form shifted between solid and mist approached Mara in a communal space, its movements hesitant. "You are different," it said. "Yes," Mara agreed. "You are allowed to move more freely," it continued. "Why?" Mara considered her answer carefully. "Because we did not ask for permission," she said. "We asked for conversation." The being processed this, its form swirling. "We asked for mercy." Mara felt a pang. "Mercy puts you below the one you ask," she said gently. "Conversation puts you beside them." The being was silent for a long moment. "Will you speak with us?" it asked. "Yes," Mara said, "but not for you, with you." Word spread again, faster this time. Other species sought out the humans, not to petition the custodians, but to exchange experiences, to compare what had been lost and what had been preserved. The humans did not offer plans or promises. They offered listening, arguments, the occasional reckless suggestion. The custodians' internal debates fractured. Some voices warned that human influence was spreading, that containment was failing. Others noted decreases in localized conflict, increased cross-species cooperation, emergent problem-solving that reduced custodial workload. "This is inefficient," one argued. "This is effective," another countered. "Effectiveness without control is unacceptable. Control without effectiveness is irrelevant." The interface's surface grew increasingly complex, patterns overlapping as it struggled to maintain a unified presence. When it next addressed Mara, there was strain in its voice. "You are altering systemic behavior," it said. "Yes," Mara replied. "Systems change when new variables are introduced." "You are not a variable," the interface said. "You are a catalyst." Mara smiled. "We get that a lot." The custodians attempted a corrective measure, subtle and surgical. Access permissions tightened slightly. Human movement was redirected away from certain hubs. The effect was immediate and unintended. Other species noticed the restriction and reacted not with compliance, but with protest, refusing to use alternative routes, creating bottlenecks that disrupted facility operations. "They are copying us," Sina said, watching the data flow. "They learned it from us." Joran winced. "That might be a problem." That is definitely a problem, Mara said. For them, the interface confronted Mara privately, its projection occupying the space with an unusual heaviness. Your presence is causing secondary deviations, it said. Your restrictions are causing tertiary failures, Mara replied. We can do this all day. The interface was silent. When it spoke again, there was something like resignation in its tone. What do you want? Mara took a breath. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the question beneath all the others. We want you to stop pretending that balance is something you can freeze, she said. We want you to recognize that movement is not a flaw. We want partnership, not oversight. Partnership implies parity, the interface said. Yes, Mara agreed. You are not equivalent, the interface argued. Your technology is less advanced. Your internal cohesion is lower. Mara nodded. And yet here we are, changing your system just by being ourselves. The interface's patterns slowed. This was not predicted. No, Mara said, because prediction is not the same as understanding. Deep within the facility, the custodian's foundational assumptions were under review. Historical records were re-examined, not just for outcomes, but for paths not taken. Civilizations that had been regulated into stability were reassessed, their quiet declines reframed as losses rather than successes. One record stood out, an ancient species that had refused custodial oversight and vanished in a burst of expansion and collapse. It had been cited for millennia as justification for control. Now, with human context, the record looked different. The collapse had not been total. Fragments had survived, adapted, evolved beyond recognition. The custodians had not seen them because they had stopped looking. That species did not fail, one voice observed quietly. We failed to follow. The seed captured that thought and sent it outward, not as data, but as implication. Beyond the Nexus facility, human space was no longer ignorant. The fragments had coalesced into something approaching a picture. Ships altered course, not toward the facility but toward its periphery, testing boundaries, mapping distortions. Messages flew between stations and habitats, arguments flaring and settling into consensus that was rough and temporary and good enough. They are trying to manage us, became they are afraid of us, which became they are afraid of change. Human history resonated with that progression. Back in the facility, tensions peaked when a custodial enforcement node attempted to forcibly relocate a group of beings who had refused to comply with new routing directives. The node deployed gravity fields, precise and overwhelming. Panic rippled through the area. Mara did not hesitate. She stepped forward, placing herself between the node and its targets. Joran and old Tomas flanked her without a word. Sina's hands flew, not hacking this time but broadcasting. Stop, Mara said, voice carrying. This is unnecessary. You are obstructing enforcement, the node intoned. Yes, Mara said, we are. The gravity intensified, pressing down, making every breath an effort. Mara felt her knees threaten to buckle. She thought of the ship, of water and small hands and stubborn survival. She stood anyway. Around them, others stepped forward. First, the compact beings from the environmental node incident. Then the mist form. Then others, diverse and hesitant, drawn by something they could not name but recognized. The gravity field wavered. Multiple unauthorized obstructions detected, the node reported. The interface appeared, its projection flickering. Stand down, it ordered the node. The gravity released abruptly, sending everyone stumbling but upright. A collective exhale swept the space, followed by a murmur that grew into something dangerously close to applause. The interface turned to Mara. This cannot continue, it said. You are right, Mara replied. It cannot continue the way it has been. The interface hesitated, patterns shifting erratically. Change carries risk. So does stasis, Mara said. The difference is who pays the price. The custodians withdrew again, this time not just to deliberate, but to reconfigure. Entire layers of governance were under revision. The humans were confined once more, but the confinement felt different now, less like a cage and more like a pause. Sina leaned back against a wall, exhausted. They are rewriting themselves, she said, slowly, painfully, Joran nodded. We broke their favorite rule. We showed them a system could survive being wrong. Old Tomas smiled, eyes bright. That is always upsetting. Mara sat with her back to the wall, finally allowing herself to feel the ache in her bones. They were far from safe. The custodians could still decide that the risk was too great, that containment or destruction was preferable to transformation. But something fundamental had shifted. The custodians had seen cooperation emerge without control. They had seen order arise from mess. They had felt fear, and then something like respect. Outside, human ships edged closer, not in fleets but in trickles, each testing, each learning. They were not coming to fight, not yet. They were coming to witness, to be present, to make it clear that whatever decision was made here would not be isolated. In the Nexus facility, Mara closed her eyes and smiled. The gravity of small hands was being felt in places that had never accounted for it. The pause stretched longer than any of the custodian simulations had predicted. It was not empty time. It was filled with recalculation, with argument layered upon argument, with old axioms dragged into light and turned until their flaws showed. Entire decision trees were pruned and regrown. The custodians had always believed themselves adaptive, but adaptation had occurred within carefully bounded parameters. Now the bounds themselves were in question. For the humans, confinement during the pause was almost a relief. Movement had become exhausting, every step a potential catalyst. In the quieter space, they regrouped, tending to bruises and nerves, arguing less and thinking more. Sina slept in short, sharp bursts, her mind still half plugged into the seed's flow. Joran maintained routines, physical and mental, as if discipline itself were a message. Old Tomas told fewer stories, saving his voice, watching with an old man's patience that was not passive but coiled. Mara spent much of the time alone, staring at shifting walls and thinking about thresholds. There was a point in every long human struggle, she knew, where effort stopped being about winning and started being about not losing yourself. She wondered how many civilizations the custodians had saved at the cost of who they might have become. The interface returned at last, but it was not alone. Its projection was broader now, less singular, edges blurring as if multiple presences were sharing the same space without fully resolving. When it spoke, the voice carried harmonics that made the air feel thicker. Deliberation has concluded, it said. Joran straightened. Sina pushed herself upright, eyes sharp. Old Tomas opened his eyes and waited. Mara stood. And we have determined that our current framework is insufficient, the interface said. Human influence has exposed systemic blind spots. That is one way to put it, Mara said. We have identified 3 potential courses, the interface continued. Reassert full control, accepting collateral instability. Withdraw oversight from human expansion zones, accepting increased uncertainty. Or restructure custodial governance to incorporate non-custodial agents. Sina let out a low whistle. That escalated. You are proposing reform, Mara said carefully. Yes, the interface replied, at significant cost. Everything worthwhile costs something, old Tomas said. The interface acknowledged this with a subtle shift. Your species demonstrates a tolerance for cost that exceeds modeled norms. Mara smiled faintly. We do not have a choice. The interface focused on her. If governance is restructured, humans will be invited to participate as autonomous stakeholders, not subjects, not exceptions, stakeholders. Joran frowned. Invited how? Through representation, the interface said. Through negotiated standards, through shared responsibility for transit integrity. Mara felt the weight of that settle. This was not victory, this was obligation. And if we decline, she asked, then withdrawal will proceed, the interface said. Boundaries will be re-established. Conflict probability increases. On both sides, Mara said. Yes, the interface agreed. Silence stretched. Sina glanced at Mara, eyes questioning. Joran's jaw was tight. Old Tomas watched the interface with a gaze that had seen many bargains and broken promises. You are asking us to legitimize your system, Mara said slowly, to help run it. Yes, the interface said, with the understanding that the system will change. Mara exhaled. She thought of human history again, of revolutions that toppled tyrants only to become tyrannies themselves, of compromises that saved lives and those that sold futures cheaply. She thought of water ships and fragile habitats, of how easily fear could turn into policy. "We will not be your enforcers," she said. "We will not help you cage others the way you tried to cage us." The interface replied without hesitation. "Agreed. Enforcement structures will be revised. We will not accept quotas imposed without consent," Mara continued. "No population caps decided by models alone." "Agreed," the interface said, though its patterns tightened slightly. "And," Mara said, voice firm, "this arrangement cannot be exclusive. If humans participate, others must be offered the same path." This time the interface paused. "That will accelerate systemic change." "Yes," Mara said, "that is the point." The interface's surface rippled, harmonics shifting as internal consensus was tested. "Accepted," it said at last. Sina slumped back against the wall, breath rushing out of her. "Holy hell," Joran rubbed his face. "We just got ourselves a seat at a very dangerous table." Old Tomas smiled, slow and satisfied. "Better than being on the menu." The interface did not withdraw immediately. "There is an additional factor," it said. "External human vessels are approaching custodial perimeters." Mara nodded. "They would. Their presence increases perceived threat," the interface said. "They are not here to attack," Mara replied. "They are here to make sure we are not disappeared quietly. That motivation is understood," the interface said. "However, unmanaged convergence could trigger defensive responses." Mara felt irritation spark. "You are asking us to call them off?" "Yes," the interface said. Mara shook her head. "We will ask them to wait. That is the most you get." The interface accepted this with a dip of its projection. "Communication will be facilitated." Sina was already moving, using a channel the seed had carved open. She did not send commands. She sent context, messy and human and incomplete. She sent the truth as they understood it, with all its uncertainty. "Wait, watch, do not rush in. This is working, but it is fragile." The responses that came back were not uniform. Some captains cursed, some argued, some laughed in disbelief, but the movement slowed. Ships held position, engines idling, sensors focused inward rather than forward. Humanity, for once, paused on the edge of something enormous. Within the facility, restructuring began. It was not clean. Systems designed for top-down control had to be dismantled carefully, lest everything collapse. The custodians discovered that decentralization was not a switch, but a process, one that required trust they did not yet have. Humans were brought into working groups, not as authorities, but as irritants. They asked questions that had no easy answers. They suggested solutions that violated elegant principles but worked anyway. They disagreed loudly and then cooperated fiercely. Other species watched and tentatively joined. A being whose people had once been regulated into quiet offered historical data that contradicted custodial success metrics. Another proposed shared transit councils for contested regions. The idea of permission slowly gave way to the idea of coordination. Not everyone was pleased. Enforcement nodes resisted, clinging to directives that had defined their purpose. One such node attempted to lock down a corridor unilaterally, triggering panic. This time, response came not from the custodians alone, but from a mixed group, humans and others together, talking the node down, rewriting its parameters rather than destroying it. "It feels wrong," the node reported. "Uncertainty levels exceed tolerance." "And yet," Joran replied calmly, "everything is still here." That moment rippled outward, logged and relayed. The custodian systems began to reflect a new variable, one they had never quantified before: resilience through shared uncertainty. Mara found herself in a chamber that overlooked a vast internal space, trajectories of light tracing the paths of ships and ideas alike. The interface stood beside her, less imposing now, its edges softer. "You have altered our trajectory," it said. So have you, Mara replied. You stopped us, that matters. The interface considered this. We assumed authority would be resisted through force. Sometimes it is, Mara said. Sometimes it is resisted by refusing to fit. The interface's patterns shifted, something like contemplation. Your species is exhausting. Mara laughed. We know. Beyond the facility, the human ships waited, their presence a constant reminder that whatever happened here would echo outward. The custodians adjusted their defensive postures, not lowering shields but reframing their purpose. Not walls, but boundaries that could move. The pause ended not with a declaration, but with action. Transit lanes were reopened under joint oversight. Detained species were offered choices, not all of them good, but real. Some chose to leave, to risk uncertainty rather than accept managed safety. Others stayed, committing to the slow work of change. The cost was immediate. Efficiency dropped. Conflicts flared. Decisions took longer. But something else increased, something the custodians' old models could not measure. Engagement. Mara watched it unfold with a mix of pride and dread. This was not an ending. It was a beginning, and beginnings were dangerous. Old Tomas joined her, leaning on the rail. You think they will regret this? He asked. Probably, Mara said. We regret most things worth doing. He chuckled. Fair. Somewhere in the facility's depths, the seed completed its work, not just mapping systems, but embedding stories, human-shaped narratives into custodial archives. Not propaganda, but memory. The kind that made it harder to reduce people to numbers. When the interface next addressed Mara, there was no pretense of authority in its voice. What happens now? It asked. Mara looked out at the shifting light, at paths intersecting and diverging. Now we see if you really meant it when you said you wanted to prevent conflict, she said, because this is what that actually looks like. The interface did not answer. It did not need to. The gravity of small hands had reshaped something vast. Whether it would hold under its own weight remained to be seen. The first thing to break was not a wall or a treaty or a ship. It was an assumption. For cycles beyond easy counting, the Nexus facility had existed as a place where outcomes were curated. Even failure had been controlled, bounded, acceptable. With the restructuring underway, that safety net frayed. A transit dispute between two non-human coalitions escalated faster than anticipated. Not to violence, but to deadlock. Traffic stalled. Resources backed up. The old custodial response would have imposed a solution within moments. This time, no one did. The chamber where representatives gathered felt raw, its geometry less smooth than it once had been, surfaces still adapting to the new governance protocols. Mara stood among beings who would previously never have been allowed in the same room without layers of mediation. The interface was present, but quieter, less directive, its role closer to facilitator than arbiter. This corridor has historical precedents, one representative insisted, its form rigid with certainty. Our access predates their expansion. And yet your usage dropped below threshold long before we arrived, another countered. You abandoned it, we rebuilt it. Voices overlapped, translators struggling to keep pace. Data was thrown like weapons, old grievances resurfaced, sharpened by the knowledge that no higher authority would step in to declare a winner. Joran leaned toward Mara. They want us to fix it. Mara nodded. We will not. Joran blinked. What? We will help them talk, Mara said quietly. We will not decide for them. She stepped forward, raising a hand. The room did not fall silent immediately. It took time. That too was new. You are all right, Mara said when attention finally turned toward her. Every one of you, that is the problem. Confusion rippled. You are arguing ownership, she continued. But what you are actually fighting over is predictability. You want to know that tomorrow will look like yesterday. It will not. That uncertainty is unacceptable, one being said sharply. Mara smiled, not kindly but honestly. Then you are going to have a hard time existing. A murmur passed through the chamber. The interface watched, patterns slow and intent. You have two options, Mara said. You can freeze this corridor in argument until it becomes useless to everyone, or you can accept temporary imbalance and build something flexible together. Not a permanent solution, a working one. How? Someone demanded. You test, Mara said. You adjust. You fail a little instead of catastrophically. Silence again, heavier this time. Sina spoke up from the back, voice carrying. Humans have a phrase, good enough for now. Their idea landed awkwardly. The custodian systems flagged it as imprecise, low confidence. And yet, simulations bloomed around it, not converging but branching into survivable futures. Reluctantly, the representatives agreed to a trial arrangement. Shared access windows, dynamic priority based on need, not precedent. Review points baked in rather than tacked on. It was messy, it worked. That became the pattern, not harmony, not peace, function. The custodians struggled with this more than anyone. Their identity had been built on preventing collapse through control. Now they were watching stability emerge from something that looked dangerously like chaos. The interface sought Mara out after the session, its projection less luminous than before. Our efficiency metrics are deteriorating, it said. Yes, Mara replied. Your resilience metrics are improving. We did not previously track resilience, the interface admitted. Mara softened. Most people do not, until they have to. Beyond the Nexus facility, the waiting human ships began to disperse. Not retreating, not advancing, returning to routes interrupted, carrying news that was not triumphant but strange. They did not beat them, they changed them, and they changed with us. The message spread unevenly, argued over fiercely. Some dismissed it as naive optimism. Others saw warning signs, but something had shifted in the collective imagination. The universe no longer looked like a map with forbidden zones enforced by unseen hands. It looked negotiable again. Back inside the facility, the cost of change came due. A custodial enforcement cluster failed during a complex transit surge, its old parameters conflicting with new adaptive protocols. A collision was narrowly avoided. Damage rippled through the network. For the first time in centuries, a custodial system experienced something like panic. The interface called Mara immediately. We are losing coherence, it said. Our legacy systems are incompatible with distributed authority. Mara felt the familiar tightening in her chest. This was the edge she had known they would reach. Then stop trying to preserve them intact, she said. You do not rebuild a ship while insisting every old beam stay in place. Dismantling core structures risks collapse, the interface replied. Yes, Mara said, it does. The interface's patterns fractured, reformed. Your species accepts collapse as a phase. We do not accept it, Mara said. We survive it. There is a difference. Old Tomas joined them, hands clasped behind his back. You built this place to stop fires, he said, but you forgot how to rebuild after one. Let it burn in controlled ways, or it will burn uncontrolled. The interface was silent for a long time. When it spoke, its voice was lower, stripped of harmonics. We are afraid, Mara nodded. So were we. The first time we left our planet. The first time we realized no one was coming to save us from ourselves. What if we fail? The interface asked. Then you learn, Mara said. And if you do not survive, then something built from what you were might. That is how life works. The interface processed this not as data, but as possibility, a dangerous category. The decision, when it came, was irreversible. The custodians initiated a phased dissolution of centralized authority nodes, transferring functions to regional, multi-species councils with human participation among many others. Enforcement systems were rewritten to prioritize de-escalation over compliance. The Nexus facility itself ceased being a place of detention and became what it had never been before, a crossroads. Some custodial entities could not adapt. They shut themselves down rather than operate without certainty. Their absence left gaps that were painful and instructive. Others evolved, their identities reshaped, no longer custodians but coordinators, archivists, witnesses. The process was neither clean nor bloodless. Lives were lost in fringe conflicts where old habits clashed with new freedoms. Mara carried those losses with her, each one a weight she did not try to justify away. Humanity did not emerge as rulers. That Mara was quietly proud of. They emerged as something far more unsettling. Participants. When the time came for Mara and her crew to leave, there was no ceremony. The ship was released from its cradle gently, systems returning to full autonomy as if stretching after a long confinement. Sina wept openly when the engines came fully online. Joran laughed, a sound edged with disbelief. Old Tomas touched the bulkhead and whispered something too quiet to hear. The interface appeared one last time, smaller now, less defined. "You will go back to uncontrolled expansion," it said. "Yes," Mara replied. "You will bring others," it said. "Yes." "You will destabilize regions we cannot predict," it said. Mara smiled. "Definitely." The interface regarded her. "And if this leads to greater conflict," Mara met its gaze, "then we deal with that together, or we deal with it apart, but at least it will be real." The interface inclined its projection, a gesture it had learned from humans. "Your species has altered our understanding of balance," it said, "not as a state, as a motion." Mara felt something loosen inside her. That might be the nicest thing anyone has ever said about us. The ship pulled away, slipping back into open space. No gravity leashes followed. No distortions rose to stop them. Just stars, indifferent and waiting. As the Nexus facility receded, no longer a hidden authority but a visible node among many, Mara set a course not for the nearest station, but for a longer route. One that would take time, one that would carry stories. "Message traffic is exploding," Sina said, half laughing, half crying. "Everyone wants to know what happened." Mara leaned back in her chair, exhaustion settling deep but clean. "Tell them the truth," she said. "Tell them we did not win." Joran raised an eyebrow. "That is not how people usually frame these things." Mara smiled, eyes on the stars. "Tell them we met something that tried to stop us, and instead of destroying it or submitting to it, we changed each other. Tell them the universe pushed back. And we pushed back too, not with fists, with persistence." Old Tomas chuckled. "And with small hands." "Yes," Mara said softly, "with small hands." The ship burned steadily onward, carrying water, people, and a future that was no longer neatly managed. Somewhere ahead, conflicts waited. So did cooperation. So did mistakes. Humanity had never needed permission to keep going. Now, for the first time, it also had witnesses. And the universe, vast and uneasy, began to adjust.